Welcome to our presentation on increasing physical activity. In our group, we have Adriana Rivera, Ashley Raniero, me, Evan Brown, Jensen Pendley, Megan Werner, Michelle Dupree Anderson. In our original study, Increasing Physical Activity Through Self-Monitoring, Goal Setting, and Feedback by Norman, 2008. It was conducted to evaluate whether a PAC intervention, similar to that reported by Van Wormer in 2004, can increase the number of daily steps taken. Attached is a PDF link. Details of the original study. The original study consisted of 4 healthy adults, 3 females, and 1 male. They used goal setting, self-monitoring, and feedback to increase the daily step count. During the baseline phase, they did not use goal setting or self-monitoring. There was no immediate feedback. All feedback was given at the end of the baseline phase. During their intervention phase, they used goal setting, self-monitoring, and immediate feedback from the experimenter. The results of their study consisted of 3 out of the 4 participants increasing the number of steps, some increasing by 2,500 steps.
Introduction to our experiment. For a long time, step counting has been used as a method to measure distance. The usage of activity trackers has increased since 2010 and have been proven to help individuals increase their daily steps by 2,500 steps on average. The purpose of this study is to replicate the experiment that was conducted by Matthew P. Norman in increasing physical activity through self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback. Norman believed that with age came weight gain, which he believed might be due to an decrease in physical activity. Norman conducted the study in order to see if there was a positive correlation between self-monitoring, goal setting, and receiving feedback from a designated peer and an increase in physical activity. There were a total of 6 adults that participated in this study. All adults were healthy, non-obese adults who exercised regularly or semi-regularly. Activity trackers, either a Fitbit or cell phone application, were used to track daily step count for this study because researchers have suggested their use in lifestyle physical activity interventions. A permanent product recording system was used in order to track each participant's daily steps. A single subject, multiple baseline, reversal design was used for the study to compare results across participants.
The purpose of the study, Adriana went over it previously a little bit, but it is overall to test the effect that the goal setting, self-monitoring, and feedback can have healthy adults to increase their daily activity levels while implementing this intervention. It is also to test the effect of using an activity tracker to count total steps to increase daily activity levels in healthy adults. Why this study? It's cost effective, few materials are needed. It is also socially significant to participants in the group. And the original study was demonstrated efficiency.
So for this study, like Adriana had stated, there were 6 participants: Ashley, a 24-year-old female; Adriana, a 26-year-old female; Evan, a 24-year-old male; Jensen, a 23-year-old female; Megan, a 23-year-old female; and Michelle, a 33-year-old female. They were all healthy, non-obese adults who exercised regularly and semi-regularly. For our setting, all participants completed the project throughout their daily activities, including work and home. Basically, there were no changes in their routine. They just went about their normal routine. The materials we needed was an accelerometer, so this could have included a Fitbit, a pedometer, or an activity tracker app on a cell phone. And the behavior we tracked were tracked steps.
Okay, our operational definition was a movement made by lifting one's foot and putting it down in a different place while simultaneously moving one's arm as required to register on an activity tracking device. For our baseline phases, data was collected on the number of steps taken daily over a 1-week time period, which is listed as 7 days. Participants were required to cover their activity trackers with masking tape and sign their names across it to ensure that the masking tape was not removed throughout the baseline. For intervention phases, data was collected on the number of steps taken daily over a 1-week time period of 7 days. All participants were required to set a daily goal for total number of steps based on the prior week's average of steps. And to increase their goal, participants had to meet their daily goal on at least 4 occasions during that week. Participants reported their daily total number of steps to their partner each day via email, and participants were provided with feedback by their established partner. Each participant met with their partner face-to-face once per week, where they were provided with verbal feedback on the direction of their data points. Reliability checks for participant reported step totals were conducted each week by their established partner. The partner checked over each of the daily totals for the week and compared the totals with participant self-reports for the previous week. For our IOA, on each day, steps were measured, inter-observer agreement was calculated. Agreement scores were calculated by dividing the number of agreements by the number of disagreements, plus agreements, and multiplying by 100 to yield a percentage. Our mean IOA was 100%. For treatment fidelity, reliability measures were conducted for the daily self-monitoring and daily email feedback components of the intervention. Treatment fidelity was calculated by dividing the number of days on which each participant did not report a daily step total during intervention by the total number of intervention days and multiplying that by 100 to yield a percentage. The treatment fidelity percentages for each group member was Adriana 86%, Megan 100%, Jensen 80%, Evan 100%, Ashley 90%, and Michelle 80%. One of the group members in group 2 did start with group 1.
For the experimental design, a single subject, multiple baseline reversal design was used for this study. Multiple baselines were conducted and collected across all participants. Participants were divided into 2 groups with data collected individually for each participant. Group 1 began intervention 1 week prior to group 2, and each group returned to baseline and then back to intervention phase over the course of the study. Each participant utilized their respective data to determine when to return to the second baseline and intervention phases.
Our baseline procedure. During our baseline, we masked our tracking devices and provided no formal feedback. We met weekly with our partner and recorded daily totals for that week. We had 2 groups. Group 1 moved to intervention after receiving a steady baseline. Group 2 stayed at baseline. We used a multiple baseline graph. When steady intervention results were reached from group 1, group 2 moved into intervention phase.
So going off of our procedure, we used goal setting, self-monitoring, and feedback. So for goal setting, it was used only during intervention phases, not during our baseline phases. Our average number of steps per day from the prior week was calculated. So the goal was calculated as long as the prior goal was met on 4 occasions. If the goal previously was not met, then the goal was not increased. For self-monitoring, our step tracking device was worn unmasked so we could see how many steps a day we were taking. And it was our reported daily step count to our partner via email. For feedback, we were given written feedback via email daily and verbal feedback during our face-to-face meetings that were conducted once per week. We also included a social validity survey. It was given to all participants at the conclusion of the study. There were 4 statements included in the survey, and it was a 0 to 4 rating scale. It was used to assess whether or not self-monitoring, feedback, and the weekly meetings helped to increase our physical activity levels. It was also used to gauge our overall satisfaction of the study. An example statement that was included in the survey was, "I believe that meeting with my partner and receiving written statements of encouragement helped to increase my physical activity level."
Okay, so here are the results of our study. One thing that I want to mention is that as you look at these results, you might notice that the baseline is not necessarily stable before moving on to intervention. And intervention data is extremely variable in some cases, returning to baseline. An attempt was made by all group members to allow data to drive decisions about returning to baseline and returning to intervention. However, given the nature of this population, great variability in day-to-day life were noted. And so, for instance, one participant alternates between administrative days and direct therapy days at work. And so time constraints of this study made it impossible to wait for stability before we moved on to the next phase. Overall, results suggested that use of goal setting, self-monitoring, and feedback were not effective in increasing steps per day when we looked at everyone together. When visually inspected in this format, it appears that none of the participants showed progress. However, one outlier data point increased the scale on the y-axis for the series of graphs. And as such, slight progress was far less detectable in this format. And so we broke down individual graphs on the following slides. Group 1 consisted of Adriana, Megan, and Michelle. And Evan's data was also placed with Group 1 as he began intervention at the same time as Group 1 began intervention. So if we look at the group member that showed some slight progress, although a significant increase was noted during the second or was not noted during the second intervention phase, Michelle did show a significant increase in steps during the first intervention phase, with a decrease in steps noted once she returned back to baseline. And control was not established given the failure of progress during that second intervention phase. Neither Adriana nor Megan showed progress with use of the intervention in this study. If we look at Adriana's graph, a slightly higher step count was documented during the baseline phases than intervention phases. And then for Megan, we see the same thing as her steps decrease each time that the intervention is implemented. Visual inspection of Evan's graph suggests that average number of steps remains consistent from baseline to intervention phases. And on one day, he almost doubled his steps before returning to the previous level of performance. So this would have skewed the averages, but his data still remained fairly consistent when we controlled for this one data point. There seems to be a slight increase in steps during intervention too for him. Group 2 participants included Ashley and Jensen. And if we look at Ashley and Jensen's graphs individually, both showed at least some progress with use of the intervention. Ashley's results were not significant, but there was a slight increase in steps during both intervention phases, with the return to a lower step count during that second baseline. Similarly, Jensen showed a small increase in step count from baseline to intervention, with a fairly significant increase in steps during the return to baseline. Decrease in steps during the return to baseline, and then another increase in steps during the second intervention phase. So now we'll have individual participants discuss their own results and potential variables that could have contributed to these results. For Michelle, we see that at baseline, she was around 5,000 steps and then increased to almost 7,000 steps during the first intervention. When returning to baseline, she went back down to 5,100 steps. And then that second increase was really slight, as we already discussed. For limitations of this, working full-time up to 45 minutes from home, in addition to just balancing family obligations and things like that, made it really hard to increase physical activity, even if there was a motivation to do so.
Now it's mine, Adriana's individual results. As you can see, my baseline is actually higher than both my intervention phases. There's a decrease of 554 steps between baseline 1 and intervention 1, and a decrease in 791 steps between baseline 2 and intervention 2. Results assess limitations of my experiment. There was the slight decrease in steps after intervention was implemented for both phases. A tangible reinforcer might have enhanced my effort in achieving an increase in steps during intervention. And my limitation would be that I'm already a very active person with a busy schedule, so it was hard to make more time to increase my daily activity levels.
For Megan, my own individual results, as Michelle went over everyone else's results, the first baseline average of 5,478 and the second phase of baseline of 5,997, and the first phase of intervention average of 5,209, and the second phase of intervention average of 5,228. As you can see, the averages of my phases did increase a little bit according in phases, but the results of goals increasing my daily steps overall in intervention were unsuccessful. Excuse me. Limitations for myself were just being sick in bed for 2 days, it definitely did not help the situation. And like many other people, there are days of work where I'm mainly sitting down or where I walk and run with other clients. It just depends on the day and the client I am working with, and that'll be my results.
For myself, my first baseline average was 4,448 steps. My first intervention average was 8,741 steps. For my second baseline average, 6,427 steps. Second intervention average, 9,057 steps. There was an increase of 4,293 steps between baseline 1 and intervention 1, an increase of 2,630 steps between baseline 2 and intervention 2. As for results and limitations, there was an increase that was measured for both baseline and interventions. An increase could have been a result of an increase in caseload, working with new kids and crisis situations at work. All of these situations can definitely increase my steps.
So my first baseline average was 7,363 steps, and my first intervention average was 8,052 steps. My second baseline average was 5,672 steps, and my second intervention phase average of steps was 6,483. So between my first baseline and intervention, it increased about 689 steps, and my second baseline and second intervention increased about 811 steps between those two phases. So for my results and limitations, although there was not a huge increase, my steps still did have a slight increase from my first baseline and my intervention phases. The goal setting and feedback were used as reinforcers to me, so that could have helped to increase my steps. Possibly with a more tangible reinforcer, it would have caused a greater increase for my steps. A possible limitation for my personal results would be that I'm already an active person, so it was hard to increase my average number of steps with my already established exercise routine.
Okay, so for mine, my baseline 1 average was 8,302 steps. My intervention 1 average was 8,581 steps. My baseline 2 average was 5,428 steps, and my intervention 2 average was 7,637 steps. So between baseline 1 and intervention 1, I saw an increase in 279 steps. And between baseline 2 and intervention 2, I saw an increase in 2,209 steps. There was a slight increase from baseline 1 to baseline 2, and then I saw a greater increase from baseline 2 to intervention 2. Receiving feedback from my established partner was a reinforcer for me, so I feel like that helped to increase my intervention. And a limitation is that I'm already very active throughout the day as a teacher, so showing any significant increase would be difficult for me.
So the results of our social validity survey, the participants who answered either a 3 or a 4 for all social validity questions were Jensen, Ashley, Megan, and Evan, and that told us that the intervention helped to increase daily physical activity level, and that the self-monitoring and receiving feedback parts of the intervention were useful parts. The participants who answered either a 2 or a 3 for all of the questions were Adriana and Michelle, and this helped to tell us that the intervention was partially helpful, but did not create much of an increase in physical activity levels, and also that receiving verbal and written feedback did not really help to increase their daily physical activity levels either.
Now on to our discussion. The goal setting, self-monitoring, and feedback intervention increased the number of steps recorded each day for some participants, but not for all. 33% of participants experienced an increase in the number of average daily steps in comparison to their baseline averages while in their intervention phases. As past researchers have noted, the majority of participants not seeing an increase in daily steps does not necessarily mean that the experiment was unsuccessful, but does show that we as individuals have daily lives that cannot be altered in order to have success within the experiment. There were several considerations that could be contributed to the lack of success to some participants.
As for the limitations, a The use of a cell phone app or to track daily step count may have caused some inaccuracies or outliers in the data. For example, setting your phone down or forgetting your phone at home. Scheduled travel days or unplanned sick days could also cause a major increase or decrease in data. Not directly related to the procedure of self-monitoring or receiving feedback. Participants of the study who are already highly active may have had difficulties increasing their steps due to their already high count of daily steps. No precautions were taken to verify that the participants did not remove the tape and self-monitoring during baseline phases. The person who was conducting reliability measures was assigned a partner within the group of participants of the study. Using a person who is known to the participant could alter the reliability measures in terms of accuracy. Limitations of utilizing online graduate students given the likelihood of working while in school and having a family.
In conclusion, after evaluating the purpose of the study, the group's participants' results, whether successful or unsuccessful, limitations, etc., what does it all mean? As discussed, 2 out of the 6 participants, in total of 33% within the group, showed an increase in daily steps throughout intervention phases. But for the 4 out of 6 participants, even though results didn't show success from the experiment, it does not mean that those participants were actually unsuccessful in total. Limitations previously discussed were unplanned sick days or travel days, full-time working in those jobs. You might be majority sitting down of the day, raising a family. Participants were already active before implementing the intervention. Time implications overall. After replicating the study, the participants within the group will continue to strive to be more active in lifestyle.
This slide states all of our references, and the following slide is what we've all contributed to the project.
This concludes our presentation. Thanks for watching, and we hope you enjoyed it.